So verse 15, and the Levites took down the ark of the Lord, and the box that was beside it. Remember that they had golden tumors and golden mice, five of each in the box beside the ark there. Uh, Back to the verse, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices on that day to the Lord. And when the five lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. These are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord, for one for Ashdod, one for Gaza, one for Eshkelon, one for Gath, and one for Ekron. And the gold mice, and the gold mice, according to the number of the cities of the Philistines, belong to the five lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they set down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua at Beth Shemesh. Verse 19, and he struck some of them of Beth Shemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them, and the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. All right, so verse 15, it tells us that they split the wood of the cart for the burnt offering. Uh, as commanded in Numbers 4, 1 through 6, it's important for us to remember that only the Levites from the family of Kahath could move the ark. And fortunately, the cows, they went into Beth Shemesh, which was a priestly city. It was a Levitical city. And you notice when the five lords of the Philistines seen it, they obviously, before they sent the cows out, they kind of wondered, even though all the tumors, all the mice, all the death, all the chaos that was going on in their major cities, they wondered if it had happened to them, uh, by accident or a coincidence. So they set up this elaborate plan or a test for God to fulfill, and they observed the cows, and they watched them the entire, I think it was about 10 miles, to see whether or not God would actually meet that test. And the tumors and the mice were all, there was five of them, one for each of the major cities, which was Ashdod, Gaza, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron. And these were the major five. Okay, honey, I'm hearing back. These are the five major cities of the Philistines here. And we get into verse 18. We'll go ahead and read it one more time. And the golden mice, according to the number of all the cities of the Philistines, belonged to the five lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they sat down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua Beth Shemesh. So the great stone, I was kind of curious about that. And as I did a translation comparison, the KJV, the NKJ, the DBY, they actually named the stone, and it's called the Stone of Abel. And this stone was significant because it was a marker between the border between the Philistines and the nation of Israel. And the text says that it stood as a witness to that day and marked it. What it did is that as a witness to that day, it was marking the end of the Philistines' possession of the ark. And then also, if you remember right, the Israelites were under, they had been defeated by the Philistines, so they were, it kind of ends this domination of the Philistines over the Israelites. And what essentially what it did is it stood as a symbol of God's judgment on the Philistines as well. And then as we get to verse 19, and it says he struck some of them, of the men of Beth Shemesh, because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them. Now, if you guys have a different version, it's going to say something a little different here. But in verse 19, it kind of takes a dark turn, and it says that there's 70 men were struck down for looking upon the ark. If we were to flip back to Numbers 4:20, it instructs them not to look upon the things that are holy, not even for a moment. These 70 men that were struck down, they probably weren't Levites, or at the very least, they were not of the family of Kohath, which the family of Kohath was the Levite family that was set apart to move and to care for the Ark of the Covenant. But either way, these people were struck down just for looking upon it. And the reason why they were struck down, I believe, is because this is, I probably used this term before, but this is what we call a presumptuous sin, which is a sin that's deliberately violating God's commandments while, assuming forgiveness, or that God's going to overlook the sin, or just kind of ignoring the consequences of it altogether. The Israelites, they especially being from a Levitical city here, they would have known that they were not to look upon the ark, and yet they chose to anyways. And in the KJV, among some other translations, you might see that and this is where there's kind of a discrepancy here. It says that they smote 50,000 and 70 men, which should be 50,000 men and 70 men. If you go back to the Hebrew, it literally translates to of the people, of the people 70 men, 50,000 men. So it kind of has an awkward translation there, but it's widely believed that this was actually a scribal error, and that it should have only been 70 men that were struck down. Many of the early church fathers, including Josephus, believe that to be the case. But whether it's 50 or 70 men or 50,000 70 men, it was still a great blow to Israel. It says it was a great, they received a great blow. Do we have any comments or anything, or anything anybody wants to add there?
Well, there is one other translational difference. The NLT says they looked into the ark. They opened it up and looked into it.
Yes, and I have that down in my notes, and I somehow skipped over it. And I don't know where I had that at, but yes, there are several translations that suggest that they actually looked into the ark.
And the high priest is the only one supposed to go in, right?
The Levite priest, more specifically, they're from the family of trying to remember how to pronounce that.
The Levites weren't even supposed to open it up either. I mean,
oh no,
they were opening it up to make sure all the stuff that was still in it. I'm sure, but yeah, that's a no-no.
They could lift it if they. So the problem is it goes back to the difference between us as Christians today being cleansed by the blood of Jesus versus back then. They had to go through ritual purifications in order to become pure, to be before God. Now, just like Jesus dying on the cross for us, it doesn't make our sins non-existent, but what it does is it covers them in a way that we can be with God. Where back then they had to go through ritual cleansing process. I don't remember what it all entails. Like, they had to shower and anoint themselves with oil, and they couldn't have sex with their wives for a certain amount of time. And there was this whole thing that they had to go through before they would go into the temple. So if any of the Levitical priests would have went through that process, I believe that the outcome would have been a little different. But they weren't ritually pure in order to be before God. So it comes down, I think, to God's goodness. It like if we're not cleansed and we're not pure before him, the goodness of God will destroy us because of the bad that is in us. And like God's goodness um cannot cohabitate with uh the evil that exist within humankind since the fall happened in the garden. So it's something to do with that. And I think that it's probably something that is getting lost in translation between the spiritual realm and the realm that we live in here on earth. I think that there's some kind of disconnect because it sounds a little, it sounds weird at the end of the day. And I think it's just because like we're trying to understand a power and a world that we've never lived in and we can't comprehend.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And, I thought it was kind of interesting, like Dwayne had mentioned it. I'd actually read it in several different places, but apparently I didn't jot it down. That a lot of translations suggest that they actually looked into the ark. And yet, if we think back to the Philistines, they didn't. They knew better. In fact, they didn't even open the ark to put the guilt offering inside of it. They put the guilt offering in a box next to it, and so that kind of I think shows the spiritual health, I guess you could say, of the Israelites. They see it, and of course they're excited because chances are they'd never seen it before, but they should have known not to open it.
Right. This is not the first time they actually end up in trouble because they're treating the ark casually. That'll happen later though. But the other thing that I really kind of enjoyed reading about, the Philistines had a more firm faith in God, the God of the Israelites, than Israel did at this point in time. They actually made offerings, a sacrificial offering, a guilt offering to it. They believed that there was power behind it, and that God was, and that it was sacred to God. And they and they had the faith to actually to look at a way to tell if it was truly God that was doing this, that by with the cow and separating it from the calf and having one that's never been yoked. They actually demonstrated more faith in the God of Israel than the Israelites were at this time. And it's another example in the Old Testament where the faith of any human, Gentile or not, can be seen and recognized by God.